All right. So it sounds like being a landlord is a relatively passive and easy thing, right? I mean, just so long as you bought a home in good condition and you made the necessary renovations to get it rented out, it actually doesn't mean that the rest of the process is going to be a cakewalk. The truth is that you're going to need a business mindset when it comes to managing your own investment property. Otherwise, you may find yourself in a sticky situation with your property and your tenants. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 10 common mistakes that new landlords make, and hopefully when it comes to your investment property, you'll be better prepared and thus not make these mistakes yourself. Let's go ahead and dive into the list. First is not running the proper checks on a potential tenant. Guys, as anxious as you may be to get a tenant in and start collecting rent, it's not worth rushing ahead without checking your tenant's credentials first. Use a rental application form that'll provide you with adequate information. I'm gonna go ahead and link where you can get one in the description below. Just pay the money necessary to obtain a credit report as well, so that you can double check to see if they have a history of late payments or are behind on certain balances, whether they have delinquent accounts, collection accounts, etc. Also take the time to verify their references. This includes employers as well as former landlords. Ask the question, if you had to come up with one or two things, areas that could be improved or weaknesses that this person has, what would they be? If you're speaking with their mother or best friend, of course they're gonna say mostly nice things, so ask specifically what their weaknesses are. Yes, it does take time, and yes, it can cost a little money, but it will be worth it in the long run and will pay off big. Another little secret is when you're meeting with these tenants, don't be afraid to take a little peek in the car when you're walking by. Usually somebody that keeps their car in a very sloppy order, they're gonna treat your house the same way. Number two, thinking the property is always going to be rented. Before you close on any property, you need to do your own financial due diligence, and you need to ensure that you can actually pay the mortgage in the event that you have months with no tenant paying rent. Vacancy rates are real. Understand what the average vacancy rates are nationally and understand what the average vacancy rates are in your area. You don't want to risk potential foreclosure and financial ruin just because you failed to do a simple cash flow analysis and maintain sufficient funds in order to cover the mortgage payments when renters are fewer and further between. We've even gone ahead and put together two fantastic free resources to help you with this. I'm going to link both of those in the description below. The Cash Flow Cruncher will help you manage and calculate your net cash flow. Secondly, we're giving you your own investment analysis worksheet, which has been generously provided by Castle & Cook Mortgage and Joe Massey, a guest here on the show. This will help you calculate whether a property is a good investment or not from a cash flow standpoint. The third mistake is underestimating the cost of repairs or ongoing property maintenance. In order to keep tenants interested in and thus paying for your property, you're gonna need to maintain it. You can't slumlord and manage to keep fair market rents. So make sure you're charging enough in rent to at least help cover a portion of the ongoing maintenance costs. Things like painting and carpet cleanings between tenants are critical. Also, plan on having to pull money either from a business or your own pocket in the event that you don't have enough cash needed to make major one-time repairs like $14,000 surprise concrete bills that I recently faced and talked about in a previous video. The fourth mistake is viewing it as just a hobby. I've never met anybody who's achieved extraordinary wealth and results by dabbling. You've got to take this seriously. Owning rental properties is a business. And in order to turn a profit, you're going to need to operate it as a business. That means things like having a separate bank account for deposits and expenses, using a bookkeeping system, and consulting with tax professionals to ensure that you are correctly handling and paying taxes on your business. Setting up a business entity is also a very important part to protecting yourself from a liability standpoint and a tax standpoint. Not only will this help with the management of your property, but if something were to happen, if somebody trips and falls and they choose to sue you, you can limit the liability for it. Number five, relying on promises. In business, you can't rely on a handshake. For your own legal protection, it's critical that your tenants sign a lease agreement and that he or she or they understand that there are terms behind this contract. It is a contract that binds them. And if you run into problems with your tenant, you're gonna need a lease in writing that holds them accountable in order to have a judge make a ruling. Know your state's laws regarding leases and ensure that you use an appropriate form for your state. A good resource for lease and rental agreements is findlaw.com. We'll link that in the description below as well. The sixth mistake is neglecting tenants. Your home that you're renting out is your responsibility. Just because somebody's living there doesn't mean you can just turn a blind eye. If you do not regularly check in with your tenants, and more specifically, the condition of the property, you're gonna have no one to blame but yourself if something goes wrong, if proper care is not being taken of the home. Take my recent experience with one of my properties as an example of the bad that can happen from even just letting 6 months go by without checking in. Just be sure that you're not violating any of your state laws regarding tenant privacy before stopping by the property unannounced. You can't just pop by anytime you want. You may inadvertently give them the right to sue you or be released from the terms of your lease agreement if you do that. So always make sure you're following state laws in terms of advanced notice. The seventh mistake is not meeting state and local housing codes. As a landlord, you are required to make sure your property meets health and safety standards. Your tenants may have grounds to break the terms of your lease if your home isn't up to codes. Even worse than that, they could potentially sue you and even be legally entitled to compensation for damage or injury due to your neglect. It's way better to avoid that situation, and normally the judges are going to rule in favor of your tenants, so make sure you're staying on top of it. The eighth mistake is delaying an eviction. Folks, not beginning an eviction proceeding as soon as legally possible really can be a costly mistake for you. If you're running into problems with a tenant and you aren't sure exactly how to proceed, you're gonna need to contact an attorney as soon as possible. Somebody that specializes in evictions is really important, and you can usually find these people by just simply contacting or participating in your local real estate investing communities. Just go to meetup.com, find your local real estate investment associations, and start looking for referrals there. The thing is, evictions can take a very long time as is, so delaying one is just gonna make the situation much harder on you. Number 9 is not enforcing the terms of your lease. Just like the previous one, the more on top of this you are, the better off you're gonna be. If your tenant is paying their rent late over and over and you outline that late rent payments are going to incur a penalty, you should charge them that penalty. If the lease states that no pets are allowed and your tenant ends up going out and pulling a puppy in unexpectedly, enforce the penalty as it's outlined in the lease. If you go easy on your tenants on one thing, they can quickly start taking that for granted, and you don't want to see these situations piling up. If you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. So just be sure that you set and enforce the standards that you want upheld in your property. In many cases, if you're putting your property into an entity, you can even quitclaim the property's title into that entity, and you can start acting on behalf of that entity as a manager of that property, which makes it easier to enforce the rules of your lease agreement on those tenants without necessarily feeling guilty. If you're the owner of the home and you start going in there and enforcing penalty after penalty, they can start to hold it against you. If you're just the messenger based on your management role, it's easier to enforce without necessarily feeling the guilt they may end up portraying or projecting at you. The 10th and final mistake that new landlords tend to make is asking illegal interviewing questions. Guys, this happens all the time. You have to be very, very careful. It's often overlooked, as most of us really do tend to be very friendly and build rapport when we're speaking with potential tenants, but you might be asking questions that could get you into a lot of trouble without you even realizing it. You don't want to run this risk of giving a potential tenant sufficient grounds to sue you for discrimination by asking the wrong questions during the screening interview. The Fair Housing Act of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 requires that you cannot deny a tenant's application based on race, or color, or religion, national origin, sex, marital status, handicap, or if they plan on having any kids. And a bonus mistake here, number 11, is not writing things down. You've got to keep written documentation on all interactions with your tenants. If you ever find yourself in an unfortunate situation where you need to take your tenant to court, this is going to be massively important. Be sure to note phone conversations, when they happened, the nature of the conversation. Keep copies of emails, voicemails, text messages, and everything. Do not discard any of it. In fact, make sure it's in electronic format. Create a notes section in your smartphone that just simply outlines all this, and it's a running tally of all interactions so that you can easily go back and reference it. Question is for you. Have you made any of these mistakes as a landlord? Are you close to buying your first investment property, or do you already have one? Go ahead and comment below with your thoughts and stories. And as always, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so that you can stay current on financial news, tips, tricks, strategies, straight from one of the most popular channels here on YouTube, talking all things credit, capital, cash flow. Until we see you again on our next video, make it a great day today and take care.